Hey, hello, how's it going? This is the second part of me upgrading my Hornet cosplay that I created about 2 years ago. The last video, I recreated the pale steel needle, and this time I'm going to be tackling the Faydown Cloak, which basically just means I'm recreating my entire cloak, because the last one was kind of an abomination. It was my first sewing project, go easy on me. This video is going to be treated more like a tutorial than most of my other videos are, because I had a lot of comments asking how to make the cloak in past videos. I do want to say though, I am no expert, I'm terrible at sewing frankly, so take all of this with a grain of salt. And without further ado, let's get into it. For the main cloak, you're going to need about 4 to 5 yards. It all depends on how long you want the cloak. I wanted it to be a little bit shorter than my old version, so it came out to be about 30 to 32 inches long. This time around, I'm starting off with a template. I rolled out and taped together a large sheet of paper that would be about the size of at least half of the cloak that I would need. And because I had my old cloak to base this off of, I just used that to trace out an estimate size that I will need. What you can do to get a good starting length is measure your wingspan and then divide that by 2, and you'll have the measurement of what your cloak should be starting from the center out. You're going to want to measure out and mark where the middle of your paper is, and then mark how long your cloak will be at the middle. Now, a quick and easy way to get your circle all the way around is to take a string, not a stretchy one like I mistook for, that caused me problems later on. Tie it to something heavy like the leg of a table, and then measure out how long your cloak is on that string. You're going to want to hold or tie a pen to that point on the string, and then go all the way around your paper with that pen. And that should give you your half circle. You also want to keep in mind, if you're wanting to make a cloak with almost no seams, then you're going to need a lot larger cuts of fabric. If you're splitting your cloak up into chunks like I am doing this time around, then you don't really need to worry about that. Speaking of, at this point I decided I wanted to make my cloak out of 8 pieces instead of 2, so I ended up folding my template twice. After I got all my pieces cut up, I started sewing 2 together at a time, just on one side. And then I would connect those 2 to 2 more, and then do the same thing again, until I had 2 half circles. Then after redrawing some of my chalk marks, I cut out the collar line on each piece. The collar line is kind of up to you on how long you want it. I have a very tight collar line, because I end up adding a zipper in later on. But if you don't want to deal with the zipper, you need to make sure that your collar can fit over your head, so measure accordingly. For me, I was just kind of guesstimating what exactly I needed, since I've already done it once before. After cutting out the collar, I sewed up each half, and I had a full cloak. To create the color, you're going to need some thick sew-in interfacing, or stabilizer. Instead of having my collar standing straight up like last time, I wanted it to fold out a little bit. So instead of cutting a straight piece, I ended up making a giant half circle. It took a lot of trial and error for me to get the right size for my cloak, so I would just recommend taking some paper and doing a bunch of test templates and seeing what size works for you. All you need to do is draw 2 half circles. Cut that out, put it together, see if you like the size, and then rinse and repeat. I trace the half circle out onto the interfacing, cut it out, and then trace that out onto 2 pieces of my fabric. I then sewed those two pieces together, leaving one end open to create a sleeve, turned it inside out, and then put the interfacing inside of that. I then sewed up the open end using a ladder stitch, and I had my collar. To sew the collar onto the cloak, I first ripped a seam where the zipper would go, placing it along one of the pre-existing seams to keep things nice and neat. I folded over the edges of the cloak and then sewed the bottom of the collar onto those edges. I had to do a little bit of bunching here and there because my measurements were not perfect, but we ball. Next, I wanted my cloak to have some dimension, so I took some horsehair braid, evenly measured out about 16 pieces to fit along the bottom of the cloak, and then I sewed them down in between each seam. You can also make it one full strip instead of cutting them up, but I wanted a little more subtle waves. After sewing them in place, I folded the edge inwards and then took some bias tape of the same color and sewed it onto the edge. And with that, the main cloak is done. For the lining layer, I wanted to keep it simple, so I took a cheap white blanket, I cut it into a rough circle, poked a hole in the middle, and then I sewed on the horsehair braid all the way around it, to give it that same dimension as the cloak. I made some EVA foam feathers, and then I sewed those on along with some real feathers, although gluing them down would work just fine. The last thing I wanted to add was a new capelet, so I started off by cutting a 22-inch half circle out of my scraps from the main cloak, cutting a bit larger of a collar than the cloak itself to allow it to easily lay over top. I cut the same length out of some pattern fabric for the lining. Then I took some cuts of ribbon, laid them in between the layers of the capelet with the outside facing in, pinned them in place, and sewed up every edge except for the collar line. I wanted a nice oversized hood, so I drafted up a pattern using some scrap fabric, adding a little extra fabric at the bottom of the opening to make the edge of the hood larger than the rest of it when draped over your head. I sewed up the edge of the hood, leaving one side open, and then patched together some scrap fur for the lining. Then, with everything inside out, I pinned the hood to the collar line of the capelet and then sewed it together, leaving a small hole to flip it. I then closed that up with a ladder stitch and added some 8-year-old eyelets onto the back to attach some little details like some beads and lace. I put a magnet on the inside of the hood and my mask so that the hood would stay in place when up.